let's talk a little bit about the projects they have underway within the parish.
Sure. They have two projects. One is the Comeet River Diversion, which I think most people are aware of. That is currently under construction. It basically takes water directly off of the Comeet River through a channel all the way to the Mississippi River. I think it's like 3 miles or more long.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Stormwater Talk. My name is Jonathan Hill. I'm with Franklin Associates, and I'm responsible for leading the communications and outreach for the Stormwater Master Plan, joined by my producer, James Taylor. The East Baton Rouge Parish Stormwater Master Plan and 20-year capital improvement plan seeks to identify flood-related risk, vulnerabilities, and recommend capital improvements to mitigate or reverse those risks. And to find out more about the Stormwater Master Plan, you can visit stormwater.brla.gov. You can also follow on social media at StormwaterEBR. I'm grateful to be joined yet again by the project manager, Melissa Kennedy with HNTB, who leads this effort. Melissa, welcome back to this podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Melissa is a wealth of information, and we're fortunate to have her back to provide more insight on the Stormwater Master Plan and its efforts. And so, Melissa, in one of your previous podcasts, you mentioned about various coordination and projects that were taking place throughout the parish that would seek to reduce the flood risk for the citizens of East Baton Rouge Parish. And so for our time together today, I want to talk a little bit about those various efforts. A few of them, the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, the Hazard Mitigation Grant projects. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has 1 or 2 projects that are happening in this area. And recently, the parish was awarded some American Rescue Plan Act funds to look at maintenance issues throughout the parish. And so if you can just kind of let's talk about those projects a little bit in depth and what you're seeing and the benefits of some of those projects. And I guess, we can start wherever you want to start. You're the expert in this, so I'll let you pick which one you want to start with first today.
Okay, I'll start with the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program projects. It's because we got those ones going. We implemented those. After the August 2016 flood, there was a federal disaster declaration, which then allowed FEMA to allocate money to those areas which received significant flooding to help repair, et cetera. So the parish was allocated around $80 million, and the way the program works for FEMA is you put in an application for various projects. And as part of that application, you have to provide what the project is, how much it's going to cost, and what the benefit of that project is going to show. So we developed a number of applications for that program for the parish, submitted those, and a number of them have been approved. I think there's 6 or 7 that have been approved right now, and they're spread out throughout the parish, and they're all different types of projects. We've got bank protection on the Comeet River up near Port Hudson Pride Road, because that area is eroding away close to the road, and we want to prevent that road from being impacted any further. We've got a culvert replacement, Harrelson lateral culvert replacement to reduce some flooding upstream of that culvert. We've got replacement of bridges on Dawson Creek at both 100 Oaks and Broussard that's going to reduce flooding of some of those neighborhoods. We've got a distributed detention project within Ward Creek, and what that means is that we're looking at a number of sites for detention that will overall reduce the flooding within that watershed. We've also got another one in Ward Creek. It's called Ward Creek at Segan Lane. There's a constriction there at Segan Lane on Ward Creek, right under the overpass from when that overpass was constructed. So by removing that restriction, we're allowing more of that flow upstream to drop and reduce the flooding upstream. But it's a significant channel downstream, so it can afford to take that water. So there's just a number of different types of projects that we're looking at. That right now they're in various phases of the process. A number of them are under contract and the designs are ongoing. The parish is currently going to be putting out some solicitations for finding consultants to do a couple more of the contracts. And one of those projects, we're still waiting from FEMA on coordinating and working out the funding. So all these projects combined are going to help reduce the risk of flooding. And the way we do that is we calculate what are the damages prior to flooding based on, again, the water depth. And we have an actual layer of all the structures within the parish. Now, we do make some assumptions on first floor elevations because we don't have that for everywhere. But we look at them, we put this information in the model and determine where the flooding is and the impacts, the damages based on those structures becoming flooding. And then when we put that project in the model, we can evaluate the difference and therefore the difference in the damages. And those differences in the damages are the benefits that we realize for those different projects. So again, it's different projects. You know, some of them are transportation related, as such as the Port Hudson Pride Road. Some of them are going to be more related to actual reducing flooding in residential and home structures. So that's really the hazard mitigation grant program.
So with that, you mentioned really a couple, and I want to kind of dissect them for a moment. You mentioned this distributed detention project. Let's talk a little bit about what that means, because oftentimes as development happens with new subdivision neighborhoods, people put in either a detention or retention pond, depending on how the developer builds it. But you're saying that there are going to be distributed detention areas throughout the Ward Creek watershed. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means when you talk about detention?
Sure. So detention, what we're trying to do is find an area to temporarily hold the water so that you don't have as much water going into the channels all at the same time and therefore causing flooding. We're trying to find areas where that water can be directed to these storage basins to hold it there until after the major rain flood recedes, and then that water is released back into the channels. And when it's released back into the channels at that time, there's not that risk of flooding because we've held it back during the major portion of the event. What we're doing with this distributed detention is a little bit different than what you're seeing for neighborhoods. We're trying to reclaim some of that floodplain storage. What you see in a neighborhood is there are detention requirements because you've now changed the imperviousness of the land by building structures on it. So that water, now you have more water running off because it can't soak into the ground. So a development is required to put in a detention to capture what that additional runoff would be as a result of it not being able to filter in the ground. But the concept is somewhat the same, where you're capturing it for a time period until that and released slowly so that you're not changing the amount of water that flows off that site.
Okay, so we have that distributed detention in Ward Creek, but also you mentioned a constriction of Ward Creek, really at the Segan Lane area. And recently, the Stormwater Master Plan announced the launch of that project roughly, I guess about a year ago now, that there was a big press event held around that effort because we were finally awarded federal funds to get that effort underway. And so let's talk about that constriction. And once kind of that constriction is removed, what is the potential impact that is anticipated as it relates to removing that constriction? But also, will it cause any adverse effects either upstream or downstream?
So again, that project, it's actually one of our favorite projects because it's not a very large project, but it has a very significant impact on reducing flooding. Again, there's just this one restriction at Segan Lane. Downstream, it opens up. Upstream, it's also a little wider. So once we remove that, we're kind of making that channel now consistent. And our model originally determined that there was almost up to 3 feet water surface elevation reductions upstream. But again, because of the area downstream can afford to absorb that difference in water without causing any impact. There is no additional flooding because of that. So that's the things that we do look at. We look at, okay, yes, we want to resolve upstream, but making sure we're not causing a negative impact downstream. Now, as the project has been awarded to a design consultant, and they are working, and as part of the FEMA requirements, once they do their more detailed analysis than what was done for the application, they will go back and model it and recalculate what those benefits are to make sure that that project is still viable, and determine the more specific impacts and benefits from it, the water surface elevation reductions.
Okay. And so in addition to the hazard mitigation grant program projects that we have, we also have some other projects that are afforded to us by some federal dollars, one of which is through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Corps project. And let's talk a little bit about the projects they have underway within the parish.
Sure. They have two projects. One is the Comeet River Diversion, which I think most people are aware of. That is currently under construction. It basically takes water directly off of the Comeet River through a channel all the way to the Mississippi River. I think it's like 3 miles or more long. It's basically a cut through the ground to remove that water. And again, that's under construction right now. We've actually incorporated that project into our model and coordinating with the Corps to make sure we're all looking at the same thing at the same way. That project is going to have significant impact on reducing flood risk, especially to the area immediately south of the diversion, because now you're capturing a lot of that water, not only directly off of the Comeet, but the area north of the diversion length. That water flows south, so now you're capturing that water from White's Bayou, Cypress Bayou, Bayou Baton Rouge, also into the Comeet diversion. So it's doing a lot of good. It's helping Zachary. It's going to help Baker. It's going to help the parish. Now, as you move downstream on the Comeet, it has less and less impact. But we are seeing water surface reductions, a little bit all the way down to Ascension Parish.
So the ultimate goal of that project is literally to divert water, change
Correct.
the entire direction of the flow of water.
Change a portion of the flow. So it pulls off a portion of the flow off of the Comeet.
Okay. And then also the Corps is working on the EBR flood risk reduction project, which consists of, I believe, the 5 tributaries projects where they're clearing and snagging. You mentioned that on a previous episode. Can you speak to that, kind of what the status of that is, what the goals are, and what they're doing?
Sure. It's called the Tributaries Project is a common name that people know of it as, and it's 5 tributaries. It's Ward Creek, Bayou Fountain, Jones Creek, and then Beaver Bayou and Blackwater Bayou in Central. Ward Creek and Bayou Fountain, part of it is it's clearing and snagging the lower portion of those 2 tributaries. For Jones Creek, it's clearing and snagging a good chunk of the watershed streams, as well as there's a portion of doing channel improvements where they're doing some, I'm going to say, channel geometrics, kind of revising the channel configuration and putting riprap along a segment. And then in Central and Beaver and Blackwater Bayou, they're also doing some channel improvements. They're phasing that work through various construction contracts. I believe some of that work may have already started in the Jones Creek. So they're phasing that work over time. I don't have the actual schedule right now, but we are monitoring that work as well.
So when you talk about clearing and snagging of these channels, what can citizens expect to see when you talk about clearing and snagging? What is the practical look of that?
So clearing and snagging basically means removing the vegetation to the ground surface and removing the restrictions within the channel in terms of stuff that's in the channel. It's not dredging, so we're not removing sediment, but downed trees. I've seen, appliances, whatever the big chunks of debris are, tires that are in the channel. It's removing all of that stuff out of it. And what that does, it allows for a smoother flow of that water. So it helps it get out. Now, I will say it helps a lot on the smaller rainfall events, those events in which the water is confined to the channel banks. But when you get to these very large events where the water exceeds the channel banks, that type of project doesn't have as significant of an impact because you've got so much water, it exceeds the channel banks. The channels at that time just become part of the floodplain. I mean, the water still is flowing. So what people will see will be that flow, a little bit of quicker flow, that water being able to get out. Now, I will also caveat that it's incumbent on those channels being maintained. So you'll see the immediate result, but unless they're maintained moving forward, it's going to go back to the way it was. Now, I do know that the parish has the intention of having a maintenance program going forward to help keep those channels clear.
So let's talk a little bit about that, the maintenance of the channels and even just the drainage system as a whole. The parish was recently awarded federal funds through the American Rescue Plan Act. Some of those funds were allocated for maintenance of the stormwater system. And so what can we expect to see as it relates to maintenance in that area for the use of those funds?
Sure. So in 2021, the parish, out of the American Rescue Plan Act, dedicated almost $2 million to clean out some of the subsurface system. I think I talked to you before. I mentioned that when we did the data collection of the subsurface system, we also identified the structures that were in need of cleaning out. So utilizing that information, the parish has contracted that work out to have those structures cleaned out. So that work was ongoing in 2021. They awarded $6 million more in 2022 to continue that ongoing effort, utilizing the database that we provided, as well as utilizing 311 calls. They also are embarking on clearing and snagging channels beyond the limits of what the Corps is doing in those channels, as well as addressing roadside ditches where there's constrictions, debris, etc., and or cave-ins. And they're looking at some of the canals that are concrete lined and repairing some of those panels that are damaged or have sloughed in that need replacement. So there's a number of things that the parish is doing regarding maintenance to help address that backlog. And again, it's based on the data we collected, and it's also based on the 311 calls from individuals. And I know that's $20 million was originally allocated for some of that work, and I know they're going to be allocating more money. And again, the parish is looking at a program to have that system continually maintained.
So maintenance is a key part of whatever that the Stormwater Master Plan seeks to do, or whatever projects that are done kind of as a one-time thing. But once those projects are completed, maintenance has to take place to make sure those are maintained.
Correct. And it's also part of the parish has environmental permit requirement to do such things. It's called the Municipal Separate Stormwater Permit, MS4. So as part of their program is to meet those permit requirements, is to continue that maintenance. Now, I will say that there is a cost to doing that, and it's a significant cost to doing that. Right now, as I said, the parish is expending a lot of funds, or I should say there's a lot of federal funds being expended to clean out the system at this time. But there will be funds, a continual stream of money required to keep that system in place. And the parish is also looking at those sources of funding.
So we've talked a good bit about a lot of the federal dollars that have been allocated to East Baton Rouge Parish for various projects, but there's also a state initiative that is underway known as the Louisiana Watershed Initiative that was created by Governor John Bell Edwards post the 2016 flood. And as a result of that effort, East Baton Rouge Parish has been awarded several projects and are looking at applying for more. Can you speak to us a little bit about what those projects currently are and what you can see potentially in the future?
Sure. So the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, as you said, was established by Governor Edwards, and subsequently to that actually being established, there was $1.2 billion allocated to the state from HUD for CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program. So what the Watershed Initiative has done is they're doing a large effort to establish and build models throughout the state that can be utilized going forward. But they are also allowing all the communities to apply for grants to utilize that funding to help them. The parish initially, for what we call the round one series of project applications that the Watershed Initiative put out, the parish put out 5 applications. 3 of those were approved. One was for Bayou de Planche floodplain preservation. Another one was Ward Creek floodplain preservation. And what those projects are is just basically acquiring that floodplain land to keep it as floodplain land. So they're going to purchase that property so that no development or anything can be done on it. It's to keep it as floodplain. The other one that it was been awarded as a result of round one funding is the Jones Creek Detention Project. That is another detention project where we're finding property adjacent to Jones Creek that we can dig out to utilize for storage during those flooding events. So those are the 3 that have been approved. The Watershed Initiative intends to have a couple more rounds of funding and opportunities. So the parish, because the parish is already working on the Stormwater Master Plan and looking for projects, will already have some projects identified that we will be able to apply for those funds.
So you're saying that as a result of the parish having this master plan effort underway and which will be completed soon, that puts East Baton Rouge Parish in a better or prime position to be prepared to apply for dollars as they come available.
Absolutely, and it's not just Watershed Initiative dollars. As you saw, they were able to utilize American Rescue Plan Act dollars, and there's more funds coming from the new bill from President Biden, the infrastructure bill. There's lots of opportunities there for federal grant funding. So we're actually in the process of going through all of those different types of grants and identifying what types of projects that we're looking at that can be utilized for those funds. So we're doing this kind of cross-check to put ourselves in the position to be ready to apply for those grants. You know, there's also other programs out there. There's the state flood control program that LADOTD manages. That's a yearly program in which they apply funding to projects, to entities that can that will reduce the risk of flooding. And their focus is on mitigating flood risks that actually have happened, whereas some other programs you're allowed to apply for grants to prevent that flood risk from happening. So we're trying to identify all of those so that we can capitalize on all those opportunities.
Great. And so when you were with us previously, when we were talking about the Stormwater Master Plan, and one of its ultimate goals is to create a list or identify capital improvement projects throughout the parish that would be instrumental in reducing flood risk. Can you kind of tell us where that stands, that process stands? How do you get to that process? Any potential idea of where these projects could be located? How would they be funded? Just any great details you can tell us about this capital improvement and plan effort.
Sure. So as part of the plan, our goal is to identify those projects that are going to reduce flood risk. And as we talked about before, the parish was separated into 11 different watersheds, as well as a regional model that looks at the larger events. So each of those models we've utilized to, based on where it's flooding, we've gone through a process to say, okay, well, we know it's flooding here. What's a possible project that could reduce that flooding? So we came up with a list of well over 300 projects initially. Then we went through a process to vet those projects based on the damages that we were seeing, as well as the cost, and coming up with a very rough benefit cost analysis to determine whether a project was really viable economically or not. And so we pared down that list. I think we're at about 150 right now that we're looking at. And what we're doing now is taking those projects and putting them in the model to get the more detailed analysis of really what the benefits are for each of those projects. And then once we do that, we also have a scoring criteria, so that once we have our list of projects, we'll go through the scoring criteria to rank them and be able to provide that list from 1 to whatever of the highest ranking, meaning what's going to provide the most benefit, to the lowest ranking, which is still going to be a viable project. Those will be the culmination of the Stormwater Master Plan, identifying that prioritized list of projects. It's then the capital improvement plan. We take that prioritized list of projects and apply the funding to them. In terms of the different types of projects, we're looking at culvert replacements, bridge replacements, channel improvements, more floodplain preservation areas, detention, subsurface system improvements where there's pipe systems that may be inadequate or missing. We want to look at establishing overland flow routes. What that means is areas in which, a community or entity might flood, and it's taking a long time for that water to drain out because there's no other course except to wait for it to get into that maybe subsurface system or detention pond before it goes out. So we're looking at establishing these overland flow routes so that water has a path to get out. So those are a number of the types of projects we're looking at.
Great. So it sounds like there's a lot happening as it relates to efforts to reduce flooding for the citizens of East Baton Rouge Parish. And I'm sure some of these projects will have benefit for other areas around us, but it appears there's a lot of dollars on the ground involved, that the parish has been aggressive in their efforts to secure funding. And the Stormwater Master Plan project team continues to look for new avenues of funding and even projects that will be beneficial to the residents of East Baton Rouge Parish. And so, Melissa, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us yet again. Every time you come on, it is a wealth of information for the residents. And honestly, I learned a lot about what's happening here within East Baton Rouge Parish. And so we definitely look forward to having you on again in the future. And to our listening audience, if you have any questions or comments or want more information about any of the content that you've heard on today, you can always visit the project website at stormwater.brla.gov. It is the most up-to-date place where you can find what's taking place as it relates to efforts to reduce flooding in East Baton Rouge Parish. So thank you for listening to this episode, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future. To find out more about the Stormwater Master Plan, you can visit stormwater.brla.gov. You can also follow on social media at StormwaterEBR.